Hello and welcome back to Take Two on the outside using Dynamo Sans Revit. And this time I promise I hit the record button. All right, so let's get started. So for any of you that like to follow along at home, you can take a picture of this QR code and it'll give you access to this PowerPoint presentation, as well as giving you access to the dataset. Learning objectives. So I did this as a presentation for, as we see at the bottom, Digital BILT Week Americas 2023 in Dallas, the middle of June. And I always like to share these presentations after I did them with everyone here at the company that's interested. Again, knowledge sharing, not required, but something that I like to share. I spent some time on this. I think others might enjoy it as well. So what we're talking about today, we'll do some quick introductions. We'll take a look at Dynamo outside of Revit. We'll take a look at how Dynamo interacts with web APIs. That's the bulk of the presentation. We'll take a look at Dynamo without a head, some final thoughts, and some questions. And then I've got some examples I'll show at the very end. So hello, my name is Sans Revit. Actually, I'm Carl Storms, Technical Solutions Lead at BIMTrack, and now Newforma Konekt. But you're not here to learn about me, you're here to learn about Dynamo Sans Revit. So I always like to start these presentations with some tailored expectations, so you know what to expect as we're going through, and I always like to sort of bring it back to morning coffee, or morning caffeine as the slide says. Up here in Canada, at Tim Hortons, a double-double, and I'm a happy man. Sometimes if we don't have that, Starbucks will get the job done, but the point is that there's several different ways to get your coffee in the morning. And when we were at the conference, John and I partook of the catering services. Not the best coffee, but it keeps you going, that is for sure. Why did I tell you about my coffee habits? Well, it's because in these presentations, I like to tailor people's expectations. And in this one, we're going to be talking about APIs a lot. And because I work at BIMTrack, Newforma Konekt now, I spend a lot of time with that API. This isn't a BIMTrack class, but it's the API I know the best, so it's the one I use for the majority of my examples. But we do also bring other APIs and tools to work with APIs into the equation. Here are some we see in the AECO industry. There are many others. Now our expectations have been tailored, let's jump in. So first we're going to take a look at Dynamo outside of Revit. Most people that know and use Dynamo know and use it from Revit, but there are several other places with which you can use Dynamo. Now, before we jump in, I thought it would be a good idea to take a look at the latest and greatest that Dynamo has to offer. And so first I'm going to take a look at the latest and greatest version of Dynamo that's used inside of Revit, give my top three examples, and this is 2.17. So the first one is Export Sample Images Package. So this is a custom package made by the Autodesk team for Dynamo that basically allows you to download from the package manager. You can pick a location, a folder where you want to get images of all the graphs you have created, and then it automatically creates the images. Why, you ask? Well, just like creating code, you are in it, you understand it, everything's perfect. 2 months, 2 weeks, 2 days after that, you may not remember. So when we're doing with visual programming, which is what Dynamo is, having an image of the graph makes your life easier when you come back to it down the road or you share with other people. So this automates that process. Now this is how it's done. It's an extension. The first thing you do is pick the folder where your graphs are stored. The next thing you do is pick the folder where you want the images to be stored, and then you hit export. And essentially what it's going to do is open, in this case, the 5 graphs. It's going to zoom out, take a picture, and save the picture back into the graph. So just that quickly, we've saved those 5 graph pictures back in the folder, not the graph, where we told it to. Helpful little tool. I always make sure that I have a graph image with the graph. So again, for that aforementioned going back a month later and understanding what the heck I was thinking about when I created the graph. Also new is the ability to insert a graph. So you can imagine you're working with code, you can go to Stack Overflow or Google or what have you and copy and paste a bit of code into what you're working on. It makes life easier. Well, you hadn't been able to do that in the past inside of Dynamo. You could only ever have one graph open at a time. So what this does is it allows you, as the name would suggest, to insert a graph or multiple graphs into your current workspace or canvas. So this means I can have bits and pieces from several graphs together. I don't have to save, close, go in, save, close, go out, and access them. Very helpful addition from the Dynamo team. They also brought us in the 2.17 release Node Autocomplete. Think of it as Google for your graphs. We've always had, or not always, for the last couple releases, we've had node type match, but this brings us the recommended nodes or the beta. So we have to make sure this feature is turned on. And essentially what it does is it predicts what node you might use to tie into this port. Now with the old node suggest, it would just say that this node will take a variable and it would give you a list of all the variables you could use. What this does is it actually predicts, it uses machine learning to say what are the popular predictions for this particular input. The downside, or something you might not be aware of, is to use this you have to be logged in. Now if you're using Revit, you're logged in anyways, no harm, no foul. If you're using Dynamo Sandbox, which we'll learn more about in a moment and we use extensively throughout this presentation, you don't have to be logged in. It's a separate product. And so when this came out, they introduced a login screen, and I always thought, why is there a login screen? A login screen. Now I know why. And the reason being is that it collects all this data and saves it in a central repository so that as users all around the world use this feature, it gets more intelligent and predicts better. Now remember I talked about Dynamo Sandbox, the standalone version of Dynamo? Well, it's always a release or two ahead of what we're using in production. And so this is the latest and greatest for 2.18 for Dynamo Sandbox. Here are my top 3. So first is charts. This used to be a custom package, and custom packages are just a bunch of nodes that users create, package together, hence the name package, and they share with the community on something called the package manager. So this used to be a package called the node model charts, and it's a way to get 6 different charts inside of your graph that are web-based. As we can see here, bar charts, heat series, you can see the list here. I won't read them all off, but it's really super cool. And what the Dynamo team has done is they've taken this package, they've incorporated it into out-of-the-box Dynamo, and they've tweaked it a little bit. It looks the same, but the back end's a little more built up. Really handy to have this information inside of your graph so that you can see it when you're doing it. We like visual, that's why we're using visual programming like Dynamo. They've also enhanced the Python editor. So if you're a Python user, we can actually create Python scripts directly inside of a Dynamo graph. And it used to be we used IronPython 2. They since upgraded to CPython 3, and just recently they've given you access to IronPython 3. So you can have your editor of choice inside of Python, or your version of Python you want to use inside of the Python editor. They've also added 6 very popular Python libraries that are included out of the box now. You can see them all listed there on the screen. So again, we've got a lot of information that we can import into our Python scripts. And so quickly in this little video, we kind of see what this new editor looks like. So first off, pick your version of Python, IronPython 2, IronPython 3, or CPython 3, which is the default. They've improved the indenting, so it's more like a typical IDE. They've also included the coloring, like a similar or typical IDE. And the last thing they did was they incorporated the colors of the reserved words to be the same as design script. Design script is the language Dynamo was built on. It's a purpose-built language for AEC that's human readable and easy to understand. It's the backbone behind this. So now if you're using a little bit of design script and a little bit of Python, the reserved words are the same. So again, nice update. This is probably one of my favorite, and it's just a little thing, but it's one of those user interfaces that makes life easier. When they updated the UI, went to all the black nodes, I want to say 2.13, but don't quote me on that, everything got bigger. And as you can see here, you weren't able to change that. So now by simply hitting Control and scroll on your mouse, you can change how big you want the library to be. And this is nice because it gives you more room on the canvas, or less room if you want to zoom in, but you now are in the control. You're not stuck with what out-of-the-box sizing there is. I really like this. So now let's take a look at the other places. Again, we're not talking about Revit here, but the other places that you can access Dynamo. So these are the products where you can currently access Dynamo: Advanced Steel, Alias, Civil 3D, FormIt, and Robotic Structural Analysis. You'll notice that Alias is a little bit behind the curve, and that's because Alias is on a different release cycle than all the rest of the Autodesk products. Once it gets released, it will get caught up. And we also have Dynamo Sandbox, I guess officially called Dynamo Core. This is that standalone version that you can use without being in any other Autodesk products, and I use it extensively in this demonstration. So now I'm going to walk through a few examples. This one is Civil 3D. After Revit, it's probably got the most adoption of all those customized versions of Dynamo. The community behind Civil 3D has really jumped into it. This is just a typical out-of-the-box example, meaning that when you download Dynamo for Civil 3D, this is one of the example files. And what you can do inside of Civil 3D is you can access Dynamo. You can also access Dynamo Player. So Dynamo Player is this simple tool, as we see here, that pops up that allows you to basically hit play like you would on an MP3 player and have the graph execute. So those that work in your firm or a company that don't want to get into the visual programming, the spaghetti as we call it, they can simply just click the button and have it happen. And what this little example is showing is it's going to pick all of the high points. It's going to put a little circle there, a marker of the coordinate, and it's going to put the coordinate into place. So everyone has access. Now, it's been a while since I've played inside of a AutoCAD-based program, so don't make fun of my Zoom skills, but you can see what you can now do with the out-of-the-box information that comes from Civil 3D, and you click on Edit inside a Dynamo Player, and we can take a look at the graph that we have here. And remember that each one of these specific versions of Dynamo is specific to that product. And we'll learn a little more about that when we get into FormIt in just a second. The other thing I want to call out, I remember I mentioned there's a big community of Dynamo users for Civil 3D, which means there's a lot of custom packages. And some of these are a little bit older, but they're still very relevant. And you'll see that a lot of them take advantage of working with DWG or AutoCAD. That is the base of Civil 3D. So things like layer manipulation can be done automatically. Very handy to have. FormIt Pro. I've been using FormIt since before it was called FormIt. It's been able to access Dynamo before, back when it used to be Dynamo Studio, which was a paid version that no longer exists. Dynamo Web, you could use it on the web, also doesn't exist anymore. So this is kind of the second kick at the can for FormIt and for Dynamo. The thing that makes this a little bit tricky is if you don't know that you need this very specific node, which is what we call the little parts we plug and play our wires into in the spaghetti, it'll never work. So without this send it to FormIt node, you can never get FormIt to work, or sorry, you can never get Dynamo to work inside of FormIt. The problem is that you can't go to the package manager to download that. And if you don't know that, you're kind of stuck. So I did what I always do when I'm not sure about something to do with Dynamo, and that is that I go to the Dynamo forum. Great place to get information. There's people that use it from all over the world, so you can usually get an answer fairly quickly. And in this scenario, Jacob Small, he's on there all the time, Dynamo superstar, let me know, or let the person who asked the question, somebody else had already asked it before me, that you need to actually open the version of Dynamo that comes with FormIt to access this node. That's the only way you can access it. So when you open up FormIt, and it has to be FormIt Pro, the version that runs on your desktop, it has its own version of Dynamo within it. If you click Edit Source Graph, it will open the graph, and then you can find the Send It to FormIt node. Without that node, you can't bake the graph, which means you can't use it. So here's a little example. Now this is actually a model I made of a little elementary school. Pretty cool looking actually. Near me for a FormIt lab I did a few years ago at Autodesk University. And essentially what we're doing is we're embedding intelligence inside of this wall. So this intelligence is driven by the UI of Dynamo. It's kind of like Dynamo Player. It looks a little different here inside of FormIt. But essentially what this does is, I put this wall in place, I get it located exactly where I want it inside of my set. And now what I'll be able to do when I select the wall is I can manipulate this wall with all of these sliders. So I can change the shape of the wall, the height, the size. I can change the location of the window, the height, the size, and I can very easily do this. So I'm basically doing some generative design here inside of FormIt. Now what you'll notice is it doesn't happen real time. So we make these adjustments either with the slider or by putting the numbers, and then we hit run, and then it will finish the baking process, and we'll see the changes inside of our model. Now we'll notice that it's not quite right, so I go back to the drawing board, I make some more changes, hit some sliders, and then I go ahead and hit run again, and it'll update. And we keep doing these iterations until we get something that we like. And the nice thing about working with FormIt Pro is that once we get this sort of nailed down, we can very easily import this into Revit and take it further. So this is kind of like the SketchUp of the Dynamo world, or the SketchUp of the Autodesk world, if you will. And so now I've got this all laid in place. Again, the really cool thing about FormIt is that little sandstone detail. I actually went to the school and I took a picture of it. So that's an actual detail from the school. As you can see, I can click View and Edit. This is the specific version of Dynamo for FormIt as it opens up here. And here's the graph. And there's that very specific node that you need to bake it. Otherwise, it doesn't work. You can see, you'll see the FormIt name and the package and all the information that you can access inside of here. The other thing that's very handy is that little star. And I put that there, but basically it's showing it doesn't say is input. This one here, it does say is input. Is input means that you want it to be exposed to the user. So here inside of the user interface, anything that has the is input checkmark beside it can be manipulated inside of FormIt. Doesn't have that checkmark like the wall width, then it's not able to be manipulated. So now let's take a look at Dynamo inside of Navisworks. Now if you're saying, I didn't see Navisworks on that graph that you showed us, Carl, of all the Autodesk products it integrates with Dynamo, it's because it doesn't. But a very smart cookie named Adam Cheatherton, who is from Australia, created a Dynamo package that you can use in Sandbox or any version of Dynamo to access Navisworks and make it do things. So here's a very simple graph that allows you to append Navisworks files. So in this scenario, we have a starting file, which is my site plan that has nothing in it. As you can see, nothing in it. I run the graph and it is now appended those three files, my architectural, my structural foundation, my structural steel. And then it saves it as an NWF. That's the working file, the links file that we use inside of Navisworks. The next thing that we can do is we can now get the clashes from within a Navisworks file, or the clash tests, run the clash tests, rename the clash tests, and save this. And we can automate this process. So first we're going to go ahead and open up this file. So this graph will do what we see here very quickly. It opens up. You saw that little blimp, and now you see that it's run the clashes. There's not a ton of clashes in this model to speed things up. You can see we've got 2, 8, 2, 4 new ones. So that's how that process works. The other really cool thing is that for the sake of this example, I have the Navisworks interface. So basically the graphical interface be displayed so we know what happens. But you can turn that off. So if you're doing large models and you don't have to show the graphics, it speeds up the process. So that's another nice thing about this package. So the next thing we're going to do is change the name of the clashes. Now again, imagine you're running a bunch of these, and now I'm going to run my MEP clashes. So I want to rename them MEP clashes, or Bob's clashes, or in this example, Carl's clashes. So in Navisworks, I know who these belong to. And with this package, we can do that. So you can see Carl's clashes, quickly change them. So again, perhaps if they're not using something like Newforma Konekt, this is a way they get around knowing who's doing what with which clashes. The last thing that we want to do is be able to save this. So again, add this little piece to the node here, and it will save it as an NWF, a file that we can use again. Right there, we're done. We've saved the file. Again, all this done without opening Navisworks, except via Dynamo. The last one is publishing an NWD. So an NWD is kind of like a 3D PDF for the Navisworks world. It's a model that you can open, that you can't change, and it's why they created Navisworks Freedom, which is a free viewer. So anyone can go download Navisworks Freedom, open an NWD, and take a look at that. So again, an NWD, it is a version you can't edit of a 3D file. So some of you that users are saying, well, why would I need to publish that? I can just save as an NWD, which is completely true. However, when you publish, you can do a lot of other things like add a password, so somebody has to have a password to be able to see the model. You can also add an expiry date, which I really liked back in my industry days. And that means that, say, for example, we have a new model every week. Well, I set the model to expire after 7 days, so they can't accidentally go into an old file. It'll just say this file is corrupt, you cannot open it. So that's a really handy thing. And you could do that with this setup. And again, imagine that you had to publish 50 different models for 50 different trades and people. You'd want to automate that process. And while this simple example just does it once, you could incorporate an Excel file with everyone's name and contact information and automate pulling the information from Excel and publishing those models. And that would look something like this. So a published file, you get a little pop-up that says, hey, this is published. Please enter the password. You enter the password, and then it will open up the file and all of the information that's contained within it in those saved viewpoints. And you can see from the little red N, not the blue N, that this is Freedom, in fact, the free version of Navisworks that we're viewing this in. Now let's go ahead and jump into Dynamo and Web APIs. So Web APIs is the bulk of this presentation. I really enjoy playing with them. But as you're learning new things, you have to do something that sort of keeps you engaged and, start with fun stuff. So what kind of fun stuff are we talking about? Well, everyone loves cats, so why don't we create some random pictures of cats? Well, I don't want to create the pictures, and somebody created an API, the catapi.com, that just shows random pictures. So why don't I just get those random pictures? Something like this. Perfect. I can do that with Dynamo. Now, as we're going through this process, we learn things. And what I learned through this process is that data shapes, we see here displaying this lovely picture of a cat, is a great package that the folks from Data Shapes have created and shared with the world that allows us to have a pop-up and display things. It can only display images that are local to your machine. To use this API, it displays images on a website. That's not local to my machine. So I needed to figure out a way to get the image from the web to my local machine. Well, enter our friend Python. I know enough about Python to know I don't know enough about Python. So Google away we go. And I found what we see here inside of this Python script. And it does what I want it to do. The downside is how it does it. So essentially what this script is doing is it's going to that website. It's pulling down the image that we see right there. That's the image from the website. And it's saving it. But I don't know where it's saving it. In reality, it's saving it inside of the Python script, which is inside of the Dynamo graph, which is saved inside of a folder, deep inside of a folder, deep inside of the Dynamo folder, deep inside of Windows somewhere. So not the easiest to get to. So for this to work the way I wanted it to, what I really wanted was the ability to name the image whatever I wanted and to save it wherever I wanted. So that every time I click the button to get a new random cat picture, it would overwrite the same image and always pop up as expected. So back to Google. And I did some Googling and I found out that Python allows you to actually direct it where to save an image. So as you can see, there's a very long absolute website or absolute file path, I should say, to where I want to save the image and the name I want to save it, randomcat.jpg. So every time I use it, it will resave over the image. The problem is that when I found the solution, something was missing. And what was missing was that little R. And it wouldn't work. So when I Googled again, I found that that little R tells Python that this is the full path directory where I want to save the file that I'm downloading from the internet, and this is what I want to call it. Now with that little R in place, everything works as expected. Every time I run the graph, I get myself a nice random cat picture. So again, had fun with random cat pictures, learned a little bit about Python and Dynamo. The next place that I learned was some random Jeopardy questions. Yes, someone has made an API that stores every single question ever asked on Jeopardy. And to get that information with a Dynamo graph, this is what it looks like. And what it does is it gives us another one of those data shape pop-ups that gives you the category and the question, gives you some time to mull over what the answer might be. You click on the answer button and you see the answer. A little bit of good fun, but of course, like everything else, there was a lesson that I had to learn along the way to make this work. And what the lesson was is that a lot of these APIs give you their data in JSON, which is great. As we can see in the watch window, it's human readable, it makes sense, it's easy to work with, and it's used all over the world, so it's not specific to anything, easy to find information about. And what I found was that I need to parse this from lists and strings, which Dynamo likes, into JSON. And of course, there's a package for that, JSON data. And this allows me to take that data and put it into that lovely example that we see there in the watch window, which if you zoom in looks like this. And so then through a little investigation, you learn that index 2 is the question, index 1 is the answer, and index 10 includes the category. Unfortunately, the category is still inside an array or group of JSON data, so we have to work on that. But the reason we need to do this at all is because if we didn't do any of this parsing of the JSON data, we just get this big long string. So just text data. That as a human, I could kind of figure out what's going in there, but Dynamo doesn't like that. So we need to do the parsing. And we need to go back to JSON data to parse one more time to take that category, put it into easy to read data like we see here, where we find out that now category 0 or index 0 is the category. And when we put that all together and we re-examine our graph, we can see that this little bit of information gives us our category. This little bit of information gives us our question. And this last little bit of information gives us our answer. So now we've learned how to parse JSON data to make it readable by Dynamo so that we can then put it into our lovely data shape pop-ups. This will become handy in a little bit when we look at information for projects. We do get to some stuff that's project related. But before that, let's take a look at some Randall Munroe wonderfulness. That's a word, wonderfulness, even if I just made it up. So Randall does this comic, XKCD. He's a brilliant person, and he makes these comics that make me laugh. One that looks like this. Now, I will be forewarned, or I guess I will forewarn all of you, that this is available. Anyone can access this data, this data set. Randall has no filter, and therefore some of the comics that come up from here also have no filter and may not be safe for work. You have been warned. This one always makes me chuckle. So in this scenario, basically the problem is that if you have a fountain too close to the bathroom, you create an infinite loop of drinking water, going to the bathroom, drinking water, you sort of see how it goes. Now with this particular scenario, the problem that I solved was that there isn't actually an API to give you a random XKCD comic. There is an API to give you the current XKCD comic. So what I had to do was basically create my own URL, the XKCD website, and the name of the JSON, which is the image that came up for it. To do that, I did some simple little math using out-of-the-box nodes. At the time I created this, there was 2,760 comics. Thankfully, they are named by number. So I just picked a random number between 1 and 2076, and then it would put all that information together to create the website. This also gives me an excuse to sort of highlight and give my sincere thanks to Radu, who created DynaWeb, which is the package that makes all of this access for the web APIs available through Dynamo. Again, free, open source. There's a GitHub, which we'll talk more about down the road. But without this, none of this would be possible. So now that we've seen some fun stuff, let's look at some practical examples of why we might use this information and these skills. So delete project sheets. So if you're using BIMTrack or Newforma Konekt, as it's now called, and if you ever used a viewer and uploaded a PDF, handy. Great, we can see these PDFs. We can automate the process of exporting them from Revit or ArchiCAD. We can even drag and drop a 400-page PDF and have it individually split into individual sheets. Awesome. Downside, I want to delete those. In the interface, you can only do it one at a time. Bummer. So what this graph does is it allows you to delete those through automation. It's not magic. It's not picking all 400 sheets and deleting them instantaneously. It's going through the process of deleting them one by one, but it's much faster than I am picking and deleting, and it does it in the background. And we're able to use data shapes to allow us to select. So instead of deleting one or deleting all, we can select what we want to delete. Now you'll see these lovely purple fill that nodes. These are here for a reason. Once you get past information that is free, like our cat API or our dog API, you may run into something where you need an API token just to authenticate that you are the proper user for this data. And when you're using the Newforma Konekt API, this is certainly true. So you need to make sure that you have the API token, you have the name of your hub ID. So these things need to be filled in before you can use these graphs. And if you don't have access to that, ask your admin, they can get that for you. What this learned, or helped me learn, we saw with the XKCD comic that there wasn't an API, but I created one by adding bits and pieces together. Well, here's sort of a programmatic way to do that same thing, where we pull the hub ID, we pull the project number, and we pull the sheet number. It gives a big long string, and then it sends that information to Newforma Konekt API to say delete the sheet. The way that Dynamo works is that it will do whatever you tell it once. And so by doing this programmatically, it will say sheet 1, then sheet 2, then sheet 3, then sheet 4, then sheet 5, and it will go through and delete all the sheets that we pick. And you'll see it'll come up with a number like this. This is a nonsensical number. We don't want to share our private information, but you get the idea. And in the end, this is the magic that actually does the deleting. Anytime you're using a delete post, this is very powerful because it's actually deleting something. Once it's gone, it's gone. So remember that. And here's an example. So in this project, you can see all of these PDFs. There's many more than that, but you can see there's PDFs in the project. I run the graph and I get this pop-up. And the nice thing about this pop-up is that I have the ability to actually select sheets. You can see there's 245 elements, 245 sheets, 245 PDFs. I can pick one, I can pick 10, or I can use this select all as I did here and pick them all. Click the little set value. Boom, they're all gone. Now again, this is automating the task of deleting them one by one in the background, so it did take some time to do that. I think it was 50 seconds in reality. But it's way quicker than me doing it, and I don't have to think about it. So it's worth the 50 seconds. Another example or case for using the web API is getting user data. So with Newforma Konekt, we can use our data analytics as a service and Power BI and see all sorts of useful issue data across multiple projects. We can log into a project and we get metrics about issue data in the project. But what we can't easily get access to is user data on a project. And this was a request from a client saying, I would like to see some user data. And there's ways you can get some of it, but it's not easy to do. And so Dynamo to the rescue. And essentially what this big monster graph does is it picks a bunch of certain data, it gathers it all together, and then it exports it to Excel to be easily consumed by the user. What I learned from this is that not all Excel export tools in Dynamo are the same. So the one that I currently use, my current favorite, is OpenXML. This is an open standard that you can use, which is open source, which is great. And then there's the old school export to Excel from Excel. Both of them work. The difference is that if you're using the OpenXML, you do not have to have Excel installed on your machine. If you're using the original version, you must have Excel because it's actually using Excel to do the exporting process. The problem with this can be that as they move from on-prem Excel to Excel 365 or whatever they're calling it, where that export process changes, the XEX file changes, it doesn't always work. So sometimes a graph that worked 6 months ago might be broke with this version of Dynamo or this version of Excel. So I've had great success with the OpenXML point. I haven't had any problems. Of course, there could be issues with that too. So there is even a third option, which is to export as CSV, which is also open and makes it a little bit easier. So that option is available as well. All said and done, Once I run it, this is the data that I get. And if we look at this little video, you can see like hubs, last login, user projects, stats, ton of data that I get all at the click of a button that I can do through these hubs and this data in this project. So very helpful information that I can have in this one spot. What's not helpful is how it looks. It's not pretty. And every time I update it, I get the same not pretty looking data. Even if I make it look good, I'm going to override it the next time I run this graph. So how do we fix that? Well, luckily, Excel allows you to map data from one Excel workbook to another. So essentially all we had to do was create in this case, a master file, a primary file, and make it look good the way that I want, and then map it to the file that comes from Dynamo. Every time we update the Dynamo file, this file gets updated. So I'll show you what that looks like. So you can see here now we have all that same data. You can see you can also have some pivot charts and tables that you can update and tweak and work with. And now they look good. They're easy to use. They're easy to understand. And you could share this information with someone and they could access it really well. Now to automate the process of this updating, we essentially go into the file. We click on Get Data from File, Excel Workbook, and we point this back to the file that's going to be created every time we run that Dynamo graph. Then we select the data we want to push. In this case, I've got 9 different tables. We load it in. And this is the key part. If we don't want to have to update the data manually, we just select this little box that says refresh data when opening. And then every time we open this file, it's going to refresh this data. So again, helpful. As I mentioned earlier, I'm familiar with the Newforma Konekt BIMTrack API, but there's other APIs you can use. So let's take a look at using Dynamo to access APS data. So APS is Autodesk Platform Services, used to be called Forge, and it consists of 13 different APIs that you can access. So if you have data inside of BIM 360 or Autodesk Construction Cloud, you can use these APIs to extract, if we want to say it correctly, the data that you need. So this is the graph we're going to use to extract some data to Excel. We got a bit of work to get there first though. So again, back to our fearless friend DynaWeb, which really saves our skin in this particular example, because not only do they have this open source package that we've been using throughout this example, they also have a GitHub where they've answered a few questions from a few customers or clients or users of their package about how do I access Forge data, or as we now call it, APS data. And this makes it much easier for those that have followed along afterwards, like myself, to be able to learn and to access that data. But DynaWeb by itself is not enough. We also need another product, or at least I use another product because it makes life much easier, called Postman. So Postman is a free tool. Yes, there's a paid version. But for what I need it for, the free version is fine. And this allows us to access APIs, really for testing APIs. But we can also use it to access API data. And the reason why I use this is because we saw with the Newforma Konekt API, you needed a token. Well, you need that with the Autodesk information as well for APS. But it updates or changes the token every 60 minutes. So that means every 60 minutes you need to create a new token. And there's a bit of a process to create that token. So Postman makes that process easier. And Autodesk understood that it's a bit of a process. They like it. It makes it secure. But they also understand that not everyone is a coder. Not everyone can be super great at doing that and might need some help. So they created a Postman collection. And they've got a couple. This is for BIM 360. They do it for ACC as well. And a Postman collection essentially is a bunch of scripts inside of Postman that do a bunch of stuff that they just give to you. You can see them all here. This makes setting up what you need to do to access information inside the API much easier. And so essentially what you do is you go to that Postman collection, you download and follow the setups. You can see they're all nicely explained. You follow through all that. You then do the API test as it explains right here. Then you can do the API references. There's more stuff after that, but that is optional. You can also go to the BIM 360 API documents. Great documentation. They have documentation for Autodesk Construction Cloud as well to find how to access the API and what calls to make. And in this case, we want to look at issues. There's a version 2. This is the current version. Version 1 is deprecated. And in the near future, will just disappear altogether. So if you have any old calls, they won't work. So now that we know how to get there, circle back around to this graph and see what it does. And we're taking advantage again of that export data to Excel. And this is what we get. Now, it doesn't look that impressive when we saw all the data we pulled from BIMTrack, issue number, a title, a status, assigned to in an email, but it was a bit of work to get there. And that is because it's a specific project, so you need to know the specific BIM 360 project. Again, I'm working with BIM 360, it could be ACC. But the issue data is stored in one repository. The user data is stored in another repository. So if you look at the issues, all you know is an Autodesk number. You don't know who created it or assigned it to. So you need to be able to take the information from the user data and the information from the issue data, match them up from the random Autodesk user number, and put them together to get all this data in one spot. So again, accessing two APIs to bring them together. And people are saying, well, why would you do that? I can just log into BIM 360. Yes, you can. But let me paint you a picture. So you're a client, a MEP subtrade, for example. You're using Newforma Konekt to store all your data. The overall general contractor is using BIM 360 to store their data. So you have issues in two platforms. This is a pain. So by using this, you could download the information from BIM 360, print out your issues. You could download the issues from Newforma Konekt, print out your issues, put them together. Now, at the time that I actually did this presentation in Dallas, that was just an example. That's how you could use this data. But that's all it was an example. Since then, I've made it come to fruition. It actually works. I can do this. And so at the end of the session, I will walk you through that workflow and show you how that works. The world premiere, if you will. So one more thing that we can do with these APIs, and this is a little bit of both. It's fun and practical. And that's using Dynaslack from our friend that gave us DynaWeb to post information to Slack when something has been done. So again, we're using this Slack API. It's fairly easy to get access to. They've made it easy. They're still secure, but they've made it easy to do, and they have great documentation. So essentially what you do is you go to this web link and make sure you use my.slack.com because it'll read your email and show you access to all the Slacks you have access to. So for example, this is my Simply Complex Slack channel. You tell it this is the channel I want to create. So you create a channel. This is a private channel specifically for posting these in place. You click the webhook integration and it gives you a big long number. And you put that number where it says your Slack hook. And now you're off to the races. And what you get is something like this, where we see Darth. Darth only leaves a Death Star for Digital BILT Week America. And DynaWeb Rock says that's a huge thumbs up for BILT and Dynamo BILT Week or Digital BILT Week 2023. I show you those two examples because those are the two things you can do. You can link to a web-based icon like Darth, or you can use an emoji as your icon like here, one or the other. Again, not super complex, but imagine back to those 50 NWDs you have to publish. What this could do is at the end of that graph, you could have it ping you in a certain channel of your choice that says, hey, these have all been published. Or every morning when someone runs that graph so that you get that updated information about all those users in that Excel spreadsheet, you get a ping on Slack that says it's done. You can now go look at that and see that new information. So again, rather simple, but helpful as well. So we're coming near the end, but before we can finish, we have to talk about our friend, the Headless Dynamo. So Headless Dynamo means, look, Ma, no graphics, no graphical user interface. So this is what Dynamo normally looks like. We don't have to do that. We can use the good old-fashioned command line interface, or as I like to call it, the Dynamo command line interface. And this basically means that we can just use some little text and run everything without opening up the graphical interface. This uses a little less bandwidth, makes it a little bit quicker, and as we see, it means that I can just have an icon on my desktop to make it work. And it's fairly simple. Again, this was new to me. Go to the Dynamo forum, find a post, do some investigating. One of the things that I learned in my investigation was that the example on the Dynamo forum had double quotes around the first bit there, which is where the file is located, but no quotes around where the graph is located, and it wouldn't work for me. So through a little bit of digging on Google, I learned that if you put double quotes around both locations, it works. At least it works for me. So now we've solved our problem, and we can open up your text editor of choice, in this case, Notepad++. You tell it where your graphical user interface or your command line interface is. You tell it where the graph is. Then you convert your txt to a bat file by just saving it as .bat, and you're good to go. As you can see, the BAT and the text look identical. So we don't want to play favorites with cats. Let's look at some random dog pics. Yes, the people that made you the cats API made you the exact same dog API. And this is what I get, a little text file. And when I run it, I get this little pop-up. You can see we've got 3 things. So if this works with anything. If I want to run more than one Dynamo graph, I just next. And basically what we have here is where the WPF CLI. You said, but Carl, right there it says Dynamo Command Line Interface. Well, that's what we call it. But since 2.1, they've changed it from DCLI to the WPF CLI, which means Windows Presentation Foundation. All of that just to say that now, using this version of it, you can access geometry as well, which we don't need in this example, but that's where the name change came from. Next, we have this little -O. That just means open. So take this program and then open this location, which is the location of the Dynamo graph. And again, if we have multiple lines, in this case we have 3, that means it's going to run and execute 3 graphs. So we save that as a bat file. We double click on it, and this is what we see. We get a pop-up. It'll load the graph. Once it says loaded file, that means it's completed. Next one, loaded file. Next one, loaded file. And when it's all done, it just disappears from your screen, and what you've asked it to do is complete. What if we want to take this one step further? So you can right-click on that bat file and say send desktop, like we see here on the screen, and I've created a desktop shortcut. If we right-click on that shortcut, we can go change icon and make it look a little better. I found this lovely dog icon here. Now, what if you don't want to see that pop up on your screen of it telling you that it's executing? Well, we can get rid of that too. So we click the little run, go to minimized, and all we're going to see is just a tiny little thing in your task tray. Which means that now when I click this icon, I get these 3 pop-ups of random dogs. It makes me smile, and then I carry on about my day. Of course, just like we saw before, we need a practical version of our Headless Dynamo. So how about having an icon on our desktop that allows us to create a BIM track, Newforma Konekt, project from scratch. So here we go. This is our bat file, and when we run it, these are the 4 graphs that it runs. Now you have to take my word for it, but this is the before. We don't see the project that I've created. Now you don't know the project that I'm going to create, but at the end you'll see that it in fact is not there. So when we execute this, the first thing that pops up with this dialog box says, hey, go ahead and give your project a name, give it a number, and then choose the project template you want. So to be able to display the project template, that means it's gone into the API, picked the templates, and shown me. So not only can I give it a name and a number, I can apply a particular template that I want to it. The next one says, hey, do you want to add an image to your project? So it comes in here. There's a little note up there that explains that you don't have to worry about the double quotes around it. But I also built in some logic so that if you forget to remove the double quotes, it will do it for you on the back end. So I put the location of the image I want for the project. And you can also see, those of you with a keen eye, that Digital Built Weeks America 2023 project didn't exist just a second ago. I've created the project. The next graph, and this one has a couple pop-ups. The first thing it's going to do is which project do you want to add a user to? And yes, it says user, not users. DynaWeb is awesome, but one of the nodes will only allow you to do one thing at a time. So we can't add users it's a known issue. Hopefully we will get that fixed. But for now, I pick that Digital Built Weeks America project. I can give that user a role, reader, editor, admin. I can choose the teams, and these teams came from that template that I added to that project. Again, I can pick all 23 teams. I can pick one. I can pick none. In this case, I'm going to add them to all the teams. And then finally, I pick the actual user. And as you can see, we see the name and we see the email. Similar to our issue with the BIM 360 data, we don't see these together by default. And the reason why I wanted to display the email, and this was input from another user, is that as you can see, there's more than one Carl in this project. In fact, there's more than one Carl Storms in this project. And if I wasn't sure which one was the right email, how would I know how to pick it? So by being able to see the name and the email, I know I've got the right one. So I select the email. Now the final thing that we're going to do, and this is something I like to do, it's certainly not required, but I like to have folders for my models and folders for my sheets that are named. So I can do this automatically. 3 folders for my architecture, MEP, and structure models, and the same for my PDF sheets. And again, I picked the project that I just created. I hit set values, and boom, just like that, you see there is the project that I created, the image, the person's been added, all those things. One thing that I would point out is you'll notice that it was created by Customer Success Manager. The API is the person that owns the hub. So anytime you use the API, it's going to be created by the person that is attached to the hub. So that's why you see Customer Success instead of Carl Storms as the creator. So some final thoughts as we bring this home. You always need to remember the steps. For Dynamo, for anything really that you're doing. And what that means is first you have to have a problem. If you're trying to learn something and you have an actual problem to solve, you're more invested and you're paying more attention than just building a widget because somebody's giving you a YouTube video to build a widget. You have to be able to solve the problem. Because if you can't solve the problem, you can't tell the code how to get to the end. You have to know the solution. So make sure you know that solution first. Then you create your graph. This is a big one. You test the graph to make sure it works. Be surprised how many times you forget a comma or a quotation or to connect a wire to a node and things don't work. Boom, you're good to go. If it doesn't work, rinse and repeat steps 1 through 4 until you get that solution that you want. So again, our friend Randall, beware of reality. I have this thing that is a task. It's tedious. I hate it. I'm going to write some code or maybe make a graph so that it can be automated. Boom, look at all that free time, Fridays off for the rest of my life. Well, reality is a harsh little beast to deal with. And you see there's writing the code, debugging the code, rethinking it, changing the UI, making it better, user input. Now, developing this code means I no longer have time for the original tasks. Harsh. Now, well, Randall brings us down from our high. He can bring us back up again. And so again, another one of Randall's comments. And the idea here is that know about the time you're putting into this. And so the reality here is you can see if I spend 1 second on something a day and I do it 50 times a day, I could spend a day programming the code and it would be worth it. If I do something 50 times a day and each time I do it, it saves me 5 minutes, well, then I can spend, 9 months. Again, take these numbers with a bit of grain of salt, but it sort of puts you through the process of thinking, is the return on investment worth it? And so this brings me back around to Dynamo. Great for prototyping. It is a really good thing for quick fixes, but sometimes it's not the be-all and end-all solution. So what does that mean? Well, it depends on what you're trying to get and who's going to use it. So if people just don't like to be in the spaghetti, they don't like to use the Dynamo interface, and Dynamo Player leaves a little bit to be desired, you can use products like Nautica Tab Pro and Orchestra that allow you to put Dynamo scripts directly in your Revit tab. I know we're not talking about Revit here, but they can make it easier to use for those that don't want to be in there. If you want to use something like PyRevit, where you can take it from Dynamo into Python and again put it right in your ribbon, we have PyRevit as well as OKPy, which comes from Orchestra, same type of interface. Maybe you want to do a no-code solution, something like if this then that or Zapier. Imagine every time you get an email, if this then that will automatically kick off a Google Sheet, which will put in the subject of the email, who it's from, and then attach the attachment inside of there. You have something like that. Of course, if we go from no code, perhaps we go to full-on code. This is a really great process. I want to implement it fully. I'm going to go into C# or Python or JavaScript. I'm going to code this right to the hilt. We also have something in the middle. No code, low code solution, Bubble, AppSmith retool. And what these do is they make an app that's easy to deploy that you don't have to be a coder to deploy, so that users can use a web-based tool to do what maybe they would do with Dynamo, but they don't need to know nothing about it. Or maybe we just go to reality here and we let AI do it. ChatGPT or GitHub Copilot or Baird. Let AI solve the solution, or maybe help you out with the solution along the way. And with that, we bring this in for a landing. What I would like to do is just quickly show you that example of using that product we did about API and accessing BIM 360 and the Newforma Konekt. So the first thing we need to do is this here is Postman. This is what I need to use to update and to bring together the token, so I can create a new token. And then once I've done a new token, we get a little pop-up that says, hey, let us have access. And then it will give us that new token. Now, I'm going to hit proceed, and then I'm going to pull it off the screen because we don't want to share that information. So I've created that new token. Then we can pull over our little Dynamo graph. This is what it looks like. So this is the first part. This is going to go into Newforma Konekt. And it's going to give me a pop-up. And this is all happening real time, no magic of GIFs or recorded videos. So it pops up, which project would you like to get the user from? So in this case, I'm going to use my API testing project. These are all the projects from my hub. So there we go. Then it's going to do some thinking. It's going to pop up another one and say, which user do you want to get the issues from? So let's go ahead and choose myself. And it's going to think, you say it's complete, so it's done. It's exported the BIMtrack Newforma Konekt issues to the Excel file. I can close out here. And now I'm going to open up the BIM 360 project. While that's opening, I'm going to go ahead and copy that new hub token. It's like a bazillion characters long. So as this opens up, I've copied my new token. I can scroll on here, and I wasn't kidding when I said it's a bazillion characters long. I post in that new token, and then I can go ahead and say run. And now we're going to go through the process again. So now we're going to see which projects from my hub. You can see I also do it because it's not just pulling BIM 360. There can also be ACC projects in there. So I'm going to scroll through. This is the project that I want to use. Now again, it's going to go through and show me all the users. So I chose Carl. I want to choose Carl again. And now it's going to pull the information, put it all together, make it look good. And eventually down here where it says run started, it will say complete, and all the data will have been pushed out to the Excel file. Now, just like I did in the other example, I've made a master file so that I've got a nice pretty version of this data. You can say it's now complete. So if I go in here, go into my APS, there is the 360 issues. That's where I put the issues. This master file is the one that makes it look good. Now, when I open this, you'll see that all the data was originally for Anthony. The last time I ran this, I got issues for Anthony. Now this time, I get issues for me. So you'll see, it doesn't take long, but you'll see the data actually updates real time once I open it. So if you look, you'll see that it says, oh, it was too quick. Too quick, it changed it too quick. But previously it said Anthony there. But you can see now I've got this data in place in order. So now again, when I go out to the field, I've got my BIM 360 issues, and I've got my BIMtrack Newforma Konekt issues. So that is it. I hope you enjoyed this. And as we're closing out and finishing up the web, I did want to just sort of show one more thing because we talked about it. I'm going to go ahead and click on my little icon. This is truly on my desk. I use this one. I have one for the cats as well. And when I click on this, it's going to show me a pop-up of a random dog pic. And then once the pop-up comes up, I can close it out and it will show me a pop-up of another one. And it will do this 3 times. Again, happening real time in the background here. So we'll give it a second, waiting for it to pop up. And here we go. So there's my first random dog. I go ahead and close this. It's going to pop up and give me another random dog. And as you can see, this isn't the fastest process. Now, this is Headless Dynamo, so it is faster than having to open up Dynamo and run this. So, you take the good with the bad as you're working your way through. There we go. Oh, that's a cutie. There's my second one. And another couple seconds and we'll see that final dog pop up. And it seems like a happy third dog is a great place to end this session. And even better, I remember to hit the record this time so we'll be able to share it. So I won't have to do this for a third time today. Yay, Carl. And there we go. And on that lovely dog note, I thank you all for coming and visiting with me today to learn a little bit about what we see here. There is the presentation and the data set if you want in the top corner. And once again, thank you very much. Have a good day.